Please don't forget subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified of new daily videos.
The soft hum of the high-efficiency HVAC system was the only sound Eric Covern allowed into his home office at 6 a.m. It was a sterile, comforting drone, a testament to the meticulous order he had engineered for every facet of his life. His desk, a slab of polished black granite, was devoid of clutter. 3 precisely aligned monitors displayed a cascade of insurance actuarial data, graphs that tracked risk with cold, undeniable logic, and a news feed curated to filter out anything remotely resembling human drama. He preferred his information factual, his probabilities quantifiable. His morning ritual was sacrosanct. The precise temperature of his artisanal coffee, the exact angle of his fountain pen on its leather blotter, the synchronized sweep of his gaze across financial reports, each detail, was a brick in the fortress he'd built against chaos. 16 years. 16 years since he had consciously excised the volatile, theatrical, and utterly illogical world of his parents from his existence. He had traded bohemian spontaneity for suburban predictability, abstract performance for concrete deliverables, emotional manipulation for mathematical certainty. And he had thrived. The house around him, a contemporary suburban colonial in pristine condition, mirrored his internal landscape. Every surface gleamed, every cushion was plumped, every blade of grass in the manicured lawn outside stood at attention. It was a monument to control, a sanctuary from the storm of his past. At precisely 6:45 a.m., a softer, more organic sound broke the mechanical hum, the gentle padding of Cassandra's bare feet on the hardwood floor, followed by the distant clatter of a ceramic mug. He allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Cassandra, with her warm, genuine empathy and unwavering belief in the good in people, was the antithesis of everything he'd fled. She was a grounding force, a constant in his equation. "Morning, love," Cassandra's voice drifted from the kitchen, rich with sleep and the promise of a shared breakfast. He emerged from his office, the scent of fresh coffee and toast a welcome deviation from the sterile air. He found her by the large kitchen island, her dark hair slightly tousled, a comfortable old sweater wrapped around her. Their son, Colby, blessedly still asleep upstairs, would soon descend, his own world a vibrant explosion of colored pencils and boundless imagination. Eric loved them fiercely, loved the safe, predictable world they inhabited. "Morning," he replied, reaching for the mug she had already filled for him, the ceramic warm against his palm. He checked his watch. 6:48 a.m., on schedule. Cassandra hesitated, stirring her coffee a beat too long. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. Her subtle shift in posture, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her gaze darted towards him then away. "So," she began, her voice a little too bright, "I had a call yesterday." Eric's internal alarm bells, long dormant, began a faint, discordant chime. He kept his expression neutral, took a sip of coffee. "Oh. From your mother." The chime intensified, a dull throb behind his temples. Maria. The name itself was a performance, a prelude to drama. He hadn't heard that name uttered in this house in 16 years. He hadn't allowed it. "Maria?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He could feel Cassandra's empathetic gaze already softening, preparing to defend. "Yes, she found my number through a friend of a friend, apparently. Said she heard I was such a kind, open person," Cassandra trailed off, a hint of awkwardness in her tone. She sounded quite desperate, Eric. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing Maria. Not the Maria he knew, but the Maria Cassandra had heard. The vulnerable, suffering artist. It was her primary costume. "Desperate for what exactly?" Eric asked, the edge in his voice sharper than he intended. Cassandra flinched slightly. "She said Alan is very ill, a chronic lung condition exacerbated by, well, their living conditions. She said they're practically destitute. No real home, just moving from one friend's spare room to another, and the medical bills are piling up. He snorted, a harsh, humorless sound. Living conditions. They've romanticized destitution for 40 years. It's part of their brand. And Alan's illnesses. They appear and disappear with remarkable convenience, usually coinciding with a financial downturn. Eric, Cassandra said, her voice gentle, you haven't spoken to them in years. People change. Maybe it's real this time. She sounded so frail. He looked at her then, truly looked at her trusting face, so open to the world's vulnerabilities. It was a quality he cherished, but one that made her utterly susceptible to Maria's particular brand of psychological warfare. Cassandra, Maria can make a stone statue weep. Her frailty is an act. Her desperation is a script. Every word is calculated, every pause rehearsed. But what if it's not? Cassandra's brow was deeply furrowed now, her soft green eyes clouded with genuine concern. She asked if she could come visit, just for a day. She said she misses you, wants to reconnect before it's too late with Alan. She just wants to see her son. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation, a direct assault on the carefully constructed narrative of Eric's stoicism. Before it's too late. That was the classic Maria crescendo, the dramatic climax to ensure guilt. Eric felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He'd meticulously built a life that had no room for this. No room for the unpredictable, the theatrical, the financially draining black hole that was his parents. For 16 years he'd been free. Now, Cassandra, in her beautiful, naive empathy, had inadvertently opened the floodgates. You said yes, didn't you? He asked, not really a question. Cassandra nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping. I felt I had to. What else could I do? She's your mother, Eric, and if Alan is truly ill. He swallowed the retort that sprang to his lips. No, he wouldn't blame Cassandra. This was Maria. Maria, the puppeteer, seeing a new, pliable audience in his wife. All right, he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. When? She said she could be here tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, so little time to prepare. Not for her arrival, but for the onslaught. The suburban sanctuary, his fortress of logic and order, was about to be breached. Maria Covern arrived precisely at 10 a.m. the following morning, not in a decrepit vehicle befitting a destitute artist, but in a surprisingly well-maintained, if slightly dusty, compact car with a bumper sticker that read, Art is Revolution. Her entrance was, as always, a performance. She didn't knock. Instead, she paused dramatically on the doorstep, a black shawl draped artfully over her slender frame, her once dark hair now a wild, untamed shock of silver that seemed to catch the morning sun with a theatrical flourish. She wore heavy, mismatched silver jewelry that clanked as she moved, and her eyes, still sharp and intense, swept over Eric's perfectly manicured front lawn, the symmetrical shrubs, the pristine paintwork, with an almost imperceptible sneer. Eric, rigid in his doorway, felt the familiar tightening in his chest. This woman, who had taught him the value of dispassionate logic through her very irrationality, was a living ghost. He hadn't realized how much he'd hoped she would truly disappear. Cassandra, however, stepped forward, her face a mask of polite warmth, genuinely ready to embrace the suffering elder. Maria, welcome, come in. Maria's gaze finally settled on Cassandra, and her face softened into a practiced expression of weary benevolence. Ah, my dear Cassandra, your warmth precedes you. I felt it even over the wire, a balm to a soul weary from the injustices of the world. She swept past Eric without a glance, her voice a resonant, theatrical murmur that filled the pristine hall, disturbing its carefully cultivated quiet. This home, so much order, a veritable museum piece. Her fingers brushed the pristine white wall as if testing for dust, a subtle, dismissive gesture. Eric clenched his jaw. Mother, it's been a long time. Maria finally turned to him, her eyes widening in feigned surprise. Eric, my boy, look at you so corporate. She ran a hand over his perfectly tailored suit sleeve, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. still clinging to the numbers I see, a safe harbor from the beautiful chaos of true living. She sighed dramatically, her head tilting. But I shouldn't expect you to understand. Your father and I, we live by a different currency, the currency of the soul. She lowered herself onto the immaculate white sofa with an audible sigh, arranging her shawl around her. Cassandra, ever the gracious host, offered tea. Earl Grey or herbal, Maria? Oh, darling, anything warm, my chest, you see. It catches so easily these days, the dampness from our various lodgings. Alan, he's much worse. His lungs, they rattle like pebbles in a tin can. A poet's lungs, tragically. Too much passion, too much truth breathed into a world that doesn't appreciate it. Eric watched the performance unfold. This was textbook Maria. The immediate pivot to physical ailment, linking it directly to their artistic struggle, all designed to evoke maximum sympathy and guilt. He noted Cassandra's immediate concern, her hurried retreat to the kitchen. "So Alan is truly unwell?" Eric asked, his voice even. He needed facts, not theatrical monologues. Maria waved a dismissive hand. "Unwell. He is ravaged, Eric, a shadow of his former vibrant self. He speaks in whispers when he speaks at all, lost to the musings of mortality. The doctors, bless their unartistic hearts, they use such cold, clinical terms. Pulmonary fibrosis, as if a label can capture the slow, agonizing erosion of a spirit." She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a crumpled tissue she produced from her sleeve. There were no tears. "What exactly do you need, Mother?" Eric cut to the chase. He knew this wasn't a social call. Maria sighed again, a deeper, more mournful sound this time. "Practicalities, Eric, always practicalities with you. One would think you hadn't sprung from the very loins of boundless creativity." She straightened, her eyes meeting his, suddenly hard. "We need help, significant help. Alan's medication is exorbitant, and the landlord, a brutish man with no soul for art, has threatened eviction from our current haven. He doesn't understand the true value of artistic contribution." "What haven?" Eric asked. "Cassandra mentioned you were moving between friends." Maria's gaze flickered. "A poetic turn of phrase, darling. Our haven is a small, unheated studio space, generously provided by a fellow struggling artist. But alas, even the most generous spirits require sustenance. We need a sum, a rather substantial sum, to cover Alan's mounting medical bills and secure a more permanent, artistically conducive sanctuary, a place where Alan can find solace in his final, delicate creations." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We are talking, Eric, about $75,000 to save your father's final creative breath." $75,000. Eric felt a bitter laugh bubble up, quickly suppressed. The audacity. It was a staggering number, but Maria had always dealt in grand figures, whether artistic or financial. He remembered the grants that vanished, the investments that evaporated, the patronage that never quite materialized. "Mother," he began, carefully articulating each word, "I cut ties with you and Alan 16 years ago precisely because of these situations. The endless demands, the dramatic narratives, the expectation that I would bail you out of self-inflicted chaos. You used to call it artistic freedom. I called it financial negligence and emotional exploitation." Maria gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Exploitation? Eric, how dare you? Everything we did, every struggle was for the art, for the pure, unadulterated expression that you, with your numbers and your suits, have so willfully abandoned." "No," Eric corrected, his voice firm. "Everything you did was for Maria and Alan. The art was merely the vehicle, the performance was the point." He looked directly into her eyes, an unblinking challenge. "I saw through it then, and I see through it now. Alan is not dying, not in the way you claim, and you are not destitute. You are simply leveraging my success, just as you leveraged the idealism of countless others over the decades." Cassandra, who had returned with a tray of tea, froze in the doorway, the delicate teacups rattling. The air crackled with a tension thicker than anything Eric's orderly world had ever produced. Maria's face, usually so expressive, went blank for a terrifying moment. Then a slow, insidious smile spread across her lips. "You think you know, do you, Eric? You think your meticulous ledgers and your cold, calculating logic can capture the vibrant, complex tapestry of our lives?" She scoffed, a dry, rasping sound. "You forget, darling, that our lives are art. And art, true art, is never beholden to the mundane truths of accountants and insurance adjusters." She rose from the sofa, her black shawl swirling around her like a dark cloud. "You built your pristine little world, Eric, brick by sterile brick. You think you buried your past. You think you erased us." She walked slowly towards the large picture window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured lawn, then turned back to him, her eyes glittering with an almost predatory intensity. "But the past, my dear Eric, is never truly dead. It merely sleeps. And sometimes," she paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with menace, "sometimes it wakes up and demands a curtain call, especially when it has a story to tell. A very compelling story about an ungrateful son who abandoned his ailing, artistic parents." Her voice, though still hushed, held the cutting edge of a master manipulator whose plans had been thwarted. The subtle threat was anything but subtle now. It was a promise. "You won't get a dime from me, Mother," Eric stated, his defiance solidifying. "Not a single unearned dollar." Maria simply smiled, a chilling, knowing curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Eric, you always were so good with numbers, but you never understood the calculus of lies. Sometimes the cost isn't measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in reputation, in peace, in the careful, fragile facade you've built for yourself." She turned, walked to the front door, and without another word, without a glance at the stunned Cassandra or the rigid Eric, she let herself out, leaving the door ajar. The silence that followed her departure was deafening, a vacuum where her theatrical presence had been. Cassandra placed the tray down with a clatter, her hands trembling slightly. "Eric," she whispered, her voice laced with fear. What was that?" He looked at the open door, then at his wife's frightened face. His pristine facade, the one he had so painstakingly built, had not merely cracked. It had fractured, and the chaos he had so desperately sought to escape was now undeniably seeping in. Maria's parting words echoed in his mind, a chilling premonition. He knew, with a certainty colder than any actuarial table, that this was far from over. His mother had just declared war, and her weapon was public perception. The stage was set, and Eric was about to be cast in a role he never wanted to play. The relief Eric felt after severing ties with Maria had been a fragile thing, built on the shifting sands of past experience. He had watched her hang up, heard the sharp click that always preceded her dramatic exits, and had allowed himself a single, shallow breath of peace. He'd done the right thing, the logical thing. He'd refused to be drawn back into their orbit of manufactured crisis, their endless requests for financial succor wrapped in grand pronouncements of artistic struggle. He'd protected his family, his hard-won order. But Maria Covern had never accepted a definitive no. Not from life, and certainly not from her only son. The phone rang again an hour later, this time a number Eric didn't recognize, but the cadence of the ring was insistent, almost theatrical. He ignored it. Then a text message flashed, thick with emojis, a wilting rose, a broken heart, a single tear. The message itself was simple, stark. "Alan is worse. Your abandonment will be known." Another followed almost immediately. "You think your perfect little world is safe. We'll see about that, Eric." A cold tendril of dread snaked through the pristine air of the suburban sanctuary, a dark stain on the clean lines of his kitchen. Cassandra, sensing his tension, had already come to stand beside him, her hand a warm weight on his arm. "What is it, Eric? Is everything all right?" He shook his head, pressing his lips into a thin, grim line. "It's Maria, she's not giving up." He didn't elaborate, couldn't bring himself to vocalize the threat, the sheer audacity of it. The woman had always possessed an uncanny ability to sniff out the most vulnerable points, the cracks in any facade, and then exploit them with the precise aim of a master archer. He had underestimated her once before. He wouldn't again. Or so he told himself. Across town, in the cluttered, dimly lit confines of the frayed canvas studio, Maria's phone vibrated with satisfaction. Alan, propped up on a mismatched armchair beneath a canvas depicting a weeping clown, watched her, a thin, sickly smile playing on his lips. He was paler than usual, yes, but not from any diagnosed ailment. His was the pallor of calculated martyrdom, of a performance in its nascent stages. He dabbed at his forehead with a crumpled silk scarf. "Did he take the bait, dearest?" Maria's sharp eyes glinted in the dim light cast by a bare incandescent bulb. "He swallowed it whole, my love. The ice-cold executive, too good for his own flesh and blood. He thinks he can hide his past behind a picket fence and a corporate title." She stroked the worn velvet curtain that served as their makeshift stage backdrop, a hungry gleam in her gaze. "He thinks he can dismiss us as inconvenient relics. Oh, how wrong he is. This calls for a grander canvas, don't you think?" Alan's breath hitched, a theatrical cough punctuating his words. "A masterpiece, Maria, a symphony of our suffering. The world needs to know the true cost of abandoning art for avarice." He raised a trembling hand, gesturing vaguely at the empty donation jar on a rickety table nearby. "Our art, our very lives, are slowly being extinguished by his heartless calculus." Maria nodded, already dialing a number etched into her memory, a number belonging to a producer she'd charmed years ago at an obscure arts festival. "Precisely, Alan. It's time for a public reckoning. It's time to paint him in hues he'll never forget." 2 days later, Eric Covern stood in his perfectly tailored suit, a sterile fortress of charcoal wool, staring at the muted television screen in the executive lounge of the Sterling Tower Executive Suites. His coffee, usually a source of calm precision, tasted like ash. Cassandra had called him, her voice tight with a fear he hadn't heard before, her words tumbling over each other. "Eric, they're on. They're on Morning Reckoning." The screen, usually reserved for financial news loops, now pulsed with the garish, oversaturated colors of a daytime talk show. The set, a circular stage with an oversized, brightly colored sofa and 2 plush armchairs, seemed to mock the controlled minimalism of his corporate world. This was the soapbox stage, a chaotic arena of manufactured drama, and his parents, Maria and Alan, were its star performers. Maria, a wild tangle of silver-streaked hair and flowing, brightly patterned scarves, sat hunched on the sofa, her face a mask of profound sorrow. Alan, even paler than Eric remembered, leaned heavily against her, a thin, threadbare blanket draped over his shoulders, his eyes fluttering with exaggerated weakness. A prominent, half-empty donation jar was strategically placed on the coffee table in front of them, catching the studio lights. The host, a woman named Brenda with an aggressively empathetic smile, held Maria's hand, her own eyes wide with feigned concern. "Maria Allen," Brenda began, her voice a saccharine drone, "thank you for being brave enough to share your incredibly difficult story with us today. It truly takes courage to open your hearts like this." Maria let out a theatrical sigh, her voice trembling just enough. "Courage, dear Brenda, is all we have left, that and our art, our dreams, but even those are fading like embers in a winter storm." She cast a mournful glance at Alan, who managed a weak, rasping cough. "And you say your son, Eric, is a high-flying insurance executive?" Brenda prompted, her tone dripping with disbelief. The LED backdrop behind them displayed a generic cityscape, then flickered to a photo of Eric himself, a professional headshot, meticulously coiffed, a blandly reassuring smile. It was a picture designed for corporate brochures, not for public dissection. Maria dabbed at her eyes with a delicate, embroidered handkerchief. "Eric, our only son, our beautiful, brilliant boy, we always encouraged his intellect, his love for numbers, but we also taught him the beauty of the soul, the necessity of art, the empathy that binds us all." She paused, allowing a single, perfectly timed tear to track down her cheek. But somewhere along the way, he forgot. Alan, his voice a frail whisper, chimed in. He exchanged his heart for a ledger, his soul for a spreadsheet. He grew cold, so cold. He shivered dramatically, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. Eric felt a tremor run through him, a seismic shock of pure, unadulterated fury. He gripped the edge of the sleek glass and steel coffee table, knuckles white. The calculated cruelty of it, the absolute precision of their lies. He was cold. They had spent his entire childhood turning his life into a performance, using him as a prop, stifling his every genuine emotion under layers of their manufactured drama. His love for numbers had been his escape, his fortress against their chaos, and now they were weaponizing it. "He refused us, Brenda," Maria continued, her voice rising in a crescendo of manufactured heartbreak. "Refused his ailing father medical treatment. Refused to help us keep our little studio, our sanctuary of creativity, alive," he said. "He said we were too much drama." Can you imagine? His own parents, starving artists, struggling for survival, and he calls us drama. The studio audience gasped on cue. A murmur of outrage rippled through the plush seating. Eric could feel their judgment, a collective weight pressing down on him through the screen. His phone, which he'd muted, vibrated relentlessly in his pocket. He knew it was work. He knew what this meant. "You poured your heart and soul into his upbringing, nurturing his gifts, and this is how he repays you?" Brenda asked, her voice laced with outrage. "Abandoning his parents, his own flesh and blood in their darkest hour. This is the man who manages people's futures." Maria nodded gravely. "We just want our son back. The son who understood that art is life, that compassion is currency, not this cold, calculating stranger who lives in a world of numbers." She glanced pointedly at the donation jar. "We just pray for a miracle, a spark of humanity." Alan coughed again, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to reverberate through the sterile air of the executive lounge. "He has forgotten the poetry of life. He lives only by a calculus of lies." The words hit Eric like a physical blow. A calculus of lies. The irony was suffocating. He watched in a daze as the segment ended, Brenda thanking Maria and Alan for their bravery, urging viewers to support true art and offering a website for donations. The screen flashed with the studio's social media hashtags, #ungratefulson and #sufferingartists prominently displayed. His private phone rang. It was David, his managing director, his voice clipped, devoid of the usual corporate cordiality. "Eric, what the hell was that? My phone hasn't stopped ringing. The board is in an uproar. We're getting blasted on social media, calls from clients. Unethical, cold-hearted. A liability. Eric, you're suspended, effective immediately. We'll be in touch with details, but for now, stay away from the office. Your company email and access have been revoked." The line clicked dead. Eric stared at the blank screen of the television, then down at his perfectly manicured hands, suddenly alien, clumsy. His world, so meticulously built, so carefully ordered, was not just cracking. It was shattering around him, collapsing into a heap of public humiliation and professional ruin. The crisp, clean lines of his office, the polished steel and glass, felt like the walls of a cage. When he arrived back at the suburban sanctuary, the air was thick with a silence heavier than any accusation. Cassandra stood in the living room, the blinds drawn, her back to him. Colby, usually immersed in his vibrant sketches, was nowhere to be seen. He could hear the faint, muffled sound of a video playing from Colby's room. He knew it was probably Maria and Alan's interview, now going viral. Cassandra turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She held her phone, the screen still displaying a clip of Maria's tearful monologue. "Eric, how could they do this?" Her voice was a strained whisper imbued with a confusion that bordered on betrayal. "Everything she said, it sounded so real, and you never told me about any of this. The cold, calculating part, is that how you see them?" The implicit question hung in the air. "Is that how you see me?" He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, choked by a cocktail of anger, shame, and overwhelming despair. He saw the doubt in her eyes, the fear, the exhaustion. He saw the strain that had settled over their perfect home, the invasion of his past into their present. The sanctuary was no longer safe. He reached for her, but she flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that nonetheless tore at something deep within him. "Eric, I can't. This is too much. All this chaos. I don't know who they are. I don't know who you are anymore." Her gaze fell to the floor, her shoulders slumping. "Our life, it's gone. It's all gone." He watched her retreat, a silent, aching chasm opening between them. His career, his reputation, his marriage all had been meticulously crafted, brick by brick, against the very chaos his parents embodied. Now, with a single grotesque performance, they had blown it all apart. He was adrift, stripped bare of his defenses, his perfect world lying in ruins around him, with no idea how to pick up the pieces, or even if there were any left to gather. The stale scent of old coffee grounds and unread spreadsheets clung to Eric like a shroud. 2 weeks. 2 weeks since his meticulously constructed world had imploded on national television. 2 weeks since the public's venomous gaze had fixed upon him, branding him the ungrateful son, the heartless executive. His Sterling Tower office, once a bastion of predictable logic and silent ambition, had become a mausoleum for his career, his suspension an elegant corporate euphemism for public shamming. Now, in the very heart of his suburban sanctuary, the pristine house he'd crafted as a fortress against chaos, he felt utterly adrift. He sat in the living room, the white sofa a stark monument to an order he no longer possessed. Sunlight, usually a welcome clarity, felt glaringly intrusive, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Tiny imperfections he now lacked the energy to address. His gaze fell upon the glass coffee table, its polished surface reflecting his distorted face. He looked haggard, his usually sharp jawline softened by sleepless nights, his eyes shadowed hollows. Cassandra had left for work hours ago, her departure marked by a silence heavier than any argument. Her trusting nature, once a comfort, had inadvertently laid the groundwork for Maria's ambush, and the guilt, though unvoiced, hummed between them like a strained wire. Every news alert, every trending hashtag, every sympathetic glance from a neighbor felt like another stone added to the cairn of his humiliation. He, Eric Covern, the man who lived by algorithms and projections, had failed to calculate the sheer, destructive force of his parents' performative cruelty. He had underestimated Maria and Alan Covern, the self-proclaimed suffering artists, who had honed their craft of manipulation over decades, turning their lives into an elaborate, never-ending drama. He had thought severing ties would protect him, that 18 years of silence would grant him immunity. How foolish he had been. The distant hum of Colby's music drifted from his son's room upstairs, a strange, melodic tapestry of synth and acoustic guitar. Eric sighed, running a hand over his tired face. Even Colby's presence, usually a grounding force, now brought a peculiar anxiety. He remembered vividly his own youthful attempts at anything remotely artistic. A small, misshapen ceramic bird he'd painstakingly sculpted in a collective workshop, only for Maria to appropriate it, paint over it, and declare it a collaborative triumph that perfectly embodied the collective spirit. The memory of that artistic spark, so quickly extinguished, still burned with a dull resentment. A few minutes later, Colby padded down the stairs, his canvas tote bag slung over his shoulder, a smear of bright green paint on his cheek. He was headed to the community center's open studio session. Eric watched him. Colby's movements were fluid, unburdened by the weight of the world, his mind clearly absorbed in some internal creative landscape. "Morning, Dad," Colby said, his voice quiet, almost shy. He rarely met Eric's eye these days, a new habit that twisted a knot in Eric's gut. "Morning, Colby, going to the studio?" Eric asked, the words feeling stiff on his tongue. He tried for casual, but it came out sounding judgmental even to his own ears. Colby nodded, shifting his weight. "Yeah, thinking of trying a new perspective with the urban landscapes, maybe incorporate some industrial decay." His eyes, so like Cassandra's, brightened at the mention of his passion. "Right, industrial decay," Eric repeated, the phrase tasting like ash. He thought of the ruined factory where his parents had held their art collective in his youth, the echoing conservatory, they'd called it. A place that smelled of damp despair and their grandiose, hollow pronouncements. He'd learned to suppress his own creativity there, burying it under layers of logic and numbers, seeing art only as a tool for their endless theatricality. He tried to ensure Colby wouldn't fall into the same trap. It's interesting, Eric continued, trying to soften his tone. But you know, son, there are so many practical applications for your skills. Have you thought about graphic design or architecture? More structured, less ephemeral. He heard the unspoken criticism, the subtle push away from pure, unadulterated art, the way they had pushed him. Colby's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He nodded again, looking at his worn sneakers. Yeah, I've thought about it, but I just really like to paint, Dad. His voice was small, hesitant, and it landed like a stone in Eric's chest. A jolt, a sudden cold shock of recognition. Eric watched Colby turn, about to leave, and saw himself, years ago, a quiet boy holding a half-finished drawing, feeling the subtle parental disapproval, the redirection of his nascent creative energy towards something Maria and Alan could use or control. He remembered Maria telling him his drawing of a solitary tree needed more emotional depth, darling, more drama. Then picking up his pencil and sketching a weeping eye into the bark, making it her own. Alan, with his pronouncements about artistic integrity being a communal endeavor, blurring the lines between creation and appropriation. He had spent his life running from their chaotic manipulation, building a fortress of logic and order, only to find himself now echoing their insidious methods. He was telling Colby what he thought Colby should be, rather than celebrating who Colby was. He was subtly shaping, directing, subtly manipulating his son's artistic drive, just as his own had been warped by their theatrical demands. It wasn't with grand pronouncements or public displays, but with quiet, insidious suggestions, with the expectation that art needed a purpose, a tangible outcome, a measurable return. He was becoming them. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The shame, the self-loathing, was immediate and searing. How could he have been so blind? He had hated their artifice, their performance, their emotional gaslighting, yet here he was in a quiet, domesticated way, perpetuating the very pattern he despised. Colby was almost out the door. Colby, wait. His son turned, curiosity warring with resignation in his eyes. Eric stood, walking slowly towards him. He felt the words forming, a new kind of truth pushing its way out. Colby, your art, it's truly yours, isn't it? Colby frowned, unsure how to respond to the uncharacteristic question. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I just draw what I see or what I feel. And it matters, Eric said, his voice raspy. He reached out, gently touching the green paint on Colby's cheek. Don't let anyone tell you it's not practical enough or dramatic enough or useful enough. It's important because it's yours. Colby blinked, a slow smile spreading across his face, a genuine, unguarded smile Eric hadn't seen in weeks. Thanks, Dad. As Colby left, the door clicking shut softly, Eric stood in the quiet living room, the words still echoing. A profound, uncomfortable truth. His parents had destroyed his life by twisting truth into performance. He was destroying Colby's creative spirit by unknowingly applying the same pressure. The cycle had to break. Not for his career, not for public vindication, but for Colby, for the purity of genuine expression, for his own suppressed truth. His humiliation, his despair, suddenly shifted. It wasn't a passive suffering. It was a call to action. He couldn't fight his parents' drama with more drama. He couldn't outperform them, but he could outfact them. He could dismantle their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood, not with emotional appeals or counter-accusations, but with cold, hard, verifiable truth. A calculus of lies, indeed. He would apply his calculus, his logic, to their lies. He walked to his home office, a space that still felt like an extension of his old life, but now its orderly rows of books and perfectly aligned pens felt like tools waiting for a new purpose. He sat down at his computer, the screens flickering to life, mirroring the sudden clarity in his mind. He typed, "Private investigator, objective, evidence, family fraud, manipulation." Hours blurred. He sifted through countless websites, forums, and articles. Many pies boasted about their aggressive tactics, their ability to dig up dirt, to create counter-scandals. That wasn't what Eric wanted. He wanted truth. He wanted someone who understood the inherent power of irrefutable facts, someone who wouldn't get tangled in the emotional theatrics, someone who could dissect a lifetime of performance into provable actions. Then he found him, Julian Thorne. The website was understated, almost austere. No flashy testimonials, no hyperbolic promises, just a concise mission statement, uncovering objective truth through methodical investigation. The biography spoke of a former detective, disillusioned with bureaucracy, seeking autonomy in the pursuit of facts. Thorne's professional photos, a lean man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, steel-gray eyes, exuded an almost clinical detachment. He looked like a man who dealt in certainties, not speculation. Perfect. Eric picked up the phone, his hand steady for the first time in weeks. Julian Thorne's office was not in a gleaming downtown skyscraper, nor was it a shadowy, smoke-filled den straight out of a noir film. It was tucked away on the second floor of a sturdy, red-brick building in a quiet, older commercial district. The waiting room was sparse, functional. 2 uncomfortable chairs, a stack of outdated magazines, and a faint smell of disinfectant and old paper. No pretenses, no theatrics. Eric appreciated that. He sat, spine rigid, clutching a manila folder filled with his meticulously organized notes, timelines of his parents' various collectives, screenshots of the talk show debacle, articles about his career suspension, and a brief clinical summary of his parents' demands. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Yet, a fragile thread of hope, almost alien, had begun to weave itself into the fabric of his despair. The door creaked open. Julian Thorne stood there exactly as depicted on his website. He wore a dark blazer, a muted blue shirt, and reading glasses perched on his nose, giving him an air of quiet academic rigor. His gaze, however, was anything but academic. It was sharp, assessing, missing nothing. "Mr. Covern, Julian Thorne, come in." His voice was low, gravelly, completely devoid of inflection. Eric rose, feeling an unexpected tremor in his hand as he extended it. Thorne's grip was firm, brief. The office was even more Spartan than the waiting room. A large, uncluttered desk dominated the space, a single monitor displaying a static spreadsheet. Files were stacked neatly on shelves, not in chaotic piles but in ordered, labeled rows. A strong scent of freshly brewed coffee, artisanal and robust, cut through the dryness of the air. "Please have a seat." Thorne gestured to a functional chair opposite his desk. Eric sat, placing his folder on his lap. Thorne settled into his own chair, leaning back slightly, his eyes never leaving Eric's face. "I understand you're looking for assistance with a family matter." Eric cleared his throat. "Yes, my parents, Maria and Alan Covern." He watched for any flicker of recognition. Thorne's expression remained impassive. Good. He wasn't looking for sympathy or prejudgment. "They've recently, and very publicly, initiated a campaign against me. False claims of destitution, severe illness, alleging I'm an ungrateful, unloving son who abandoned them. It culminated in an appearance on Morning Reckoning 2 weeks ago. You may have seen it." Thorne nodded. "I saw some of the clips online. My work often involves media scrutiny. Your firm suspended you, I believe." "Indefinitely, yes." Eric felt a familiar flush of humiliation but forced himself to maintain eye contact. "Their claims are entirely fabricated. My father is not gravely ill. They are not destitute. This is a pattern of behavior, a lifelong performance designed to manipulate and extract resources. They've done it before with various art collectives and intentional communities they established over the years." He pushed the folder across the desk. I've compiled a brief summary, including key dates and some of the more public instances of their theatricality. I also have evidence of their current financial position, which contradicts their public narrative. Thorne picked up the folder, his movements precise, almost surgical. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. He didn't flip idly, he read, absorbing each detail. "You're an insurance executive, Mr. Covern. Numbers, facts, I appreciate your methodical approach." "It's all I have left," Eric admitted, the raw honesty escaping him. "I've built my entire life on logic and verifiable facts precisely to escape their world of manufactured emotion and convenient truths. And now, it's been shattered by it. I don't want to descend into a public shouting match. I don't want revenge. I want objective truth, unassailable facts that will dismantle their lies irrevocably." Thorne looked up, his gray eyes piercing. "And what do you hope to achieve with these unassailable facts?" "Vindication," Eric said, the word feeling surprisingly powerful. "For myself and frankly for my son. I've realized I've been in my own way repeating their patterns however subtly. I want to clear my name not just in the public eye but for my family, for my son to understand that truth, not performance, is the foundation of a life." He hesitated. "And I want them to be exposed for what they truly are. Not suffering artists but calculating manipulators." Thorne nodded slowly, closing the folder. "This is a complex case, Mr. Covern. Emotional narratives, especially those presented with artistic flair, resonate strongly with the public. To counter that, we need incontrovertible evidence. Financial records, legal documents, third-party testimony from former associates who can corroborate your account, independent of personal bias." "I understand that," Eric said, feeling a surge of resolve. "I believe the evidence exists. I've just been too close, too emotionally compromised to find it myself." Thorne considered him for a long moment. "My fees are not insubstantial, and this will likely be a lengthy process. My work is discreet, thorough, and entirely focused on verifiable data. I do not engage in speculation or emotional appeals. Are you prepared for the truth, whatever form it may take?" "I am," Eric affirmed, his voice steady. He pictured Colby's genuine smile. "More than I've ever been." "Very well," Thorne said, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "I'll draw up a retainer agreement. I'll start by reviewing your dossier. Then I'll begin tracing their movements, public and private, their various ventures, and seek out individuals who crossed paths with them. It will take time, Mr. Covern, but if the truth is there, I will find it." As Eric left Thorne's office, the gray light of late afternoon had begun to soften the city. The air, crisp and cool, felt different. He had laid bare his deepest wounds to a stranger, but that stranger had offered him not pity but a plan. A logical, methodical, factual path forward. He still felt the sting of public humiliation, the weight of his suspended career, but now a quiet determination had taken root. He had sought logic to escape his parents. Now he would use it to define his own truth, and perhaps finally reclaim not just his reputation, but a truer version of himself. He had opened the door to his past, not with fear, but with a calculated, desperate hope. Julian Thorne, a silent sentinel of facts, would begin to peel back the layers of deceit, starting with the immediate, glaring artifice of the frayed canvas studio. Julian Thorne traced the faded address on his tablet, a ghost of a grin playing on his lips. Eric Covern's case was exactly the kind he relished, not the messy, emotional drama that usually plagued family disputes, but a request for unassailable facts, a cold calculus to dismantle a lifetime of manipulation. The preliminary meeting with Eric had been brief, clinical almost. Eric's precise recounting of his parents' theatrics a stark contrast to the emotional fallout he described. Julian admired the man's resolve to fight fire not with fire, but with ice-cold data. His initial assessment of Maria and Alan Covern, gleaned from a rapid scan of public records and social media, suggested a pair of professional performers, adept at monetizing perceived victimhood. Now, it was time to move beyond the digital echoes and uncover the tangible truth. His first stop was the frayed canvas studio, nestled in a rapidly gentrifying but still gritty urban neighborhood. It looked precisely like the kind of struggling artist Haven Julian had expected. Mismatched workbenches, canvases depicting overly dramatic abstract suffering, and a pervasive smell of stale coffee, cheap incense, and old ambition. He adopted the persona of a potential patron, nursing a lukewarm coffee, allowing his eyes to wander. Maria, her hair a wild, henna-tinged mess, was holding court near a makeshift stage, recounting a tearful tale of artistic persecution to a small, gullible audience of three. Alan, meanwhile, sat slumped in a worn armchair, occasionally punctuating her monologue with a well-timed theatrical cough. Julian noted the way Maria subtly directed attention to a half-empty donation jar, the way Alan's frailty seemed to wax and wane with the presence of new faces. He also spotted a small, almost imperceptible earpiece in Maria's left ear, a detail that spoke volumes about her carefully curated spontaneity. They weren't just performing, they were directing, producing, and starring in their own tragic opera, demanding payment for admission. Julian logged the observations, the precise timings of Alan's coughs, the subtle shifts in Maria's vocal inflections, filing them away as irrefutable patterns. Days later, Julian steered his unmarked sedan down a long, overgrown track, the city's hum replaced by the crunch of gravel and the whispering silence of encroaching nature. The echoing conservatory loomed ahead, a skeletal industrial behemoth swallowed by ivy and decay. This was Maria and Alan's infamous art collective headquarters, a monument to their grandiose vision and eventual abandonment. Stepping through a gaping hole where a loading bay door once hung, Julian felt the pervasive dampness immediately, the air thick with the smell of mildew, dust, and a ghost-like scent of old oil paint. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced shattered windows, illuminating peeling murals that depicted abstract, swirling figures caught in existential angst. Maria's handiwork, he surmised. The central performance hall was vast, eerie, dominated by a dilapidated stage littered with broken instruments. He found a shattered piano, its keys yellowed and silent, a grotesque parody of the harmony it once attempted to create. In what must have been communal living quarters, tattered fabric hangings draped like morbid flags. He sifted through discarded art supplies, cracked tubes of paint, and dried-up brushes, each item a silent testament to faded dreams. Julian's keen eye spotted a loose floorboard in a smaller, dust-choked room that seemed to have been an office. Beneath it, tucked away, he found a stack of moldering journals. Most were Maria's self-aggrandizing manifestos, filled with florid prose about truth through performance. But one, smaller, covered in a crude drawing of a stick figure with a huge, worried frown, belonged to a young Eric. Julian carefully leafed through it, his gloved fingers tracing hesitant, childlike sketches of fantastical creatures battling dark, amorphous shapes. Interspersed were short, sparse entries. Mom said my drawings are too tight. Needs more freedom, more chaos. My chaos is just messy, not art. Dad says I don't feel enough. I feel everything, just not like them. A small, crudely carved wooden bird tucked within the pages revealed a brief, unmanipulated artistic impulse, later abandoned. The quiet suffering in Eric's childish hand was palpable, a chilling counterpoint to the performative chaos his parents so desperately sought. Julian photographed everything, the raw, emotional evidence solidifying the mechanical data he already possessed. His next appointment took him to a quieter, more ordered space, the Verita's studio, Lena Petrova's art restoration and conservation workshop. The studio was a sanctuary of scientific truth-telling, meticulously clean and filled with the quiet hum of specialized equipment. Lena Petrova, compact and agile with fine lines around her eyes, greeted him with a polite, almost surgical detachment. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice measured, "I don't typically discuss past associations. My work is about preserving authenticity, not dredging up old dramas." "I understand," Julian replied, his voice calm, "but Eric Covern believes your perspective is crucial. He spoke of you with respect, as someone who saw his parents for what they truly were, not what they performed. Lena's gaze, initially guarded, softened minutely. Eric, yes, a quiet boy always watching. She paused, picking up a tiny scalpel, her movements precise. I was young then, idealistic, drawn by their initial charisma, the promise of true artistic freedom. They called themselves a collective. It quickly became clear they were a black hole, sucking in talent and emotional energy to fuel their own ego. She described how Maria and Alan would take others' raw ideas, subtly alter them and present them as collaborative masterpieces, always ensuring their own names were most prominent. Their art wasn't about creation, it was about appropriation. Their truth was a performance designed to manipulate. They saw everyone, including their own son, as props in their elaborate personal drama. Julian pressed, "Did you ever see Eric directly affected?" A shadow crossed Lena's face. Every day, Maria would tell him his drawings lacked soul, that his numbers were boring. Alan would lament his lack of artistic fire. They stifled him not with cruelty but with this insidious emotional gaslighting that made him doubt his own perceptions, his own nascent talents. They needed him small, malleable, an audience for their grandiosity. It broke my heart, but I was just an apprentice. I couldn't intervene. Her testimony was devoid of theatrics, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had seen deception and now dedicated her life to its undoing. Julian recognized the quiet resentment in her eyes, the residue of a painful past. He thanked her, leaving with Lena's solemn confirmation that Maria and Alan's behavior was a consistent pattern, not a recent aberration. His next interview brought him to the unadorned atelier, Alara Varma's community arts workshop, a grounded space where the earthy scent of clay mingled with the quiet dedication of work. Alara, with her stocky build and hands calloused from honest labor, was initially more defensive. Why revisit that? It was a lifetime ago. Because it's still happening, Julian stated, and your account can help someone who suffered as you did. Alara's deep brown eyes fixed on him, a silent challenge. They ruined so much for me. I believed in them, Mr. Thorne. I thought their collective was about genuine art pushing boundaries, but Maria saw boundaries only as things to exploit, and Alan cheered her on. She recounted a specific, painful incident. I worked on a sculpture for months, poured my soul into it. It was a raw piece about vulnerability. Maria saw it, called it exquisite, then a week later presented it as a collaborative work with her own gaudy additions at a gallery opening. She said I was too naive to understand true collaboration, that my initial vision lacked marketable drama. It was heartbreaking. She stole my voice, then convinced me it was for my own good. And Eric, Julian asked softly. He was a ghost, always observing, rarely speaking. They'd parade him around, our son, the mathematician, a living testament to structured thought, as if he were an exhibit. Anything he expressed that wasn't artistic enough for them or too logical was dismissed, made to feel inferior. They saw his quietness as a weakness to be pitied, a void for their creativity to fill. I saw a child terrified to be himself. Alara's voice was low, filled with an enduring pain. I chose to dedicate my life to honest craft after that, to teach students to honor their own vision, not bend it to someone else's performance. They broke my trust, but they taught me what art truly is, not what you perform, but what you authentically create, even in its imperfections. The Civic Vault of Records was a stark contrast to the artistic studios, a grand, turn-of-the-century building, smelling of old paper and bureaucratic precision. Julian spent hours sifting through dusty microfiche and digital archives, unearthing forgotten grant applications, business registrations, and property deeds linked to Maria and Alan Covern's various enterprises, including their earliest venture, the Shifting Sands Commune. The paper trail, dry and methodical, spoke volumes of inflated expenses, dubious fund allocations, and a systematic pattern of leveraging idealistic ventures for personal gain. He then met Margaret Sinclair, a former member of the Shifting Sands commune, in a quiet cafe. Margaret, with her soft green eyes and practical demeanor, was initially hesitant. "It's all so long ago. I just wanted to forget that chapter." "I understand," Julian said, "but your experience can provide critical corroboration for Eric Covern. He was a child there, too." Margaret nodded, her gaze distant. "Eric, yes. A silent observer even then. He'd spend hours drawing in the dirt with a stick far away from the community circle." She described the commune as a place of promised utopia, where Maria and Alan cultivated their charisma to attract idealists, and more importantly, their resources. "They convinced us to pool our savings for communal projects, land acquisition for artistic freedom. But the funds always seemed to evaporate." Maria would claim creative emergencies or unforeseen artistic expenses. Alan would back her up with philosophical jargon about the fluidity of value. Margaret detailed how they'd coerce members into signing over assets under the guise of shared ownership, then quietly siphon off the profits. "I lost everything, my small inheritance, my trust in people. They weren't just artistic manipulators, they were financial predators. They fed off idealism, then left it hollow." She pointed to an old news clipping Julian had retrieved from the civic vault, detailing a failed co-op venture. "See, they blamed a hostile capitalist system. It was their own theft." Her pragmatic assessment, rooted in tangible loss, painted a picture of calculated, decades-long financial abuse that extended far beyond the realm of art. From the mundane brutality of financial fraud, Julian moved to the intellectual dissection of their artistic pretense. Isabel Morrow, an avant-garde theater director, met him at her Insight Playhouse, a modern, intimate space that hummed with genuine creative energy. Isabel, intense and expressive, immediately understood Julian's quest. "Maria and Alan Covern," Isabel stated, her voice resonating with a contained passion, "were not artists. They were emotional terrorists who hijacked the language of art to justify their cruelty. I encountered them in my late 20s briefly. I was drawn to their so-called radicalism, their willingness to challenge norms." She gestured around her theater. "This space is for authentic vulnerability, for truth through expression." Their performance was an act of control, a grotesque spectacle designed to diminish others and elevate themselves. She articulated how they used theater of the absurd as an excuse for chaotic behavior and breaking the fourth wall to intrude on personal boundaries. Their art was a weapon. They stripped people of their emotional armor under the guise of raw truth, then flayed them alive. Poor Eric was their ultimate, unwitting subject, the quiet boy whose very existence contradicted their performative chaos, therefore becoming a constant target for their artistic intervention. Isabel's insights offered a profound, intellectual framework for understanding the Covern's long-standing performative cruelty, confirming Julian's observations from a critical artistic perspective. His final consultation was with Vivienne Laurent, a veteran art critic, at the Lumina Cultural Foundation, a historically dignified building now showing signs of genteel struggle. Vivienne, elegant and world-weary, had a piercing emerald gaze that seemed to hold decades of observation. She spoke with precise articulation, each word carefully chosen. "I bear a deep regret, Mr. Thorne," Vivienne began, a subtle tremor in her voice. "Early in my career, I championed Maria and Alan Covern. I saw their raw energy, their defiance. I mistook their narcissism for genius, their manipulative charisma for avant-garde daring. I granted them exhibitions, even secured some early funding for their collective. It was a profound misjudgment." She described how she gradually saw through their facade. Their art was never about intrinsic merit or genuine expression. It was a vehicle for attention, a demand for veneration. They fed on the praise, the drama, the controversy. And when the well ran dry, they moved on, leaving emotional wreckage in their wake. I watched Eric, a quiet boy, trying to navigate their manufactured storm. He was often used as a prop, his logical mind held up as a foil to their unbridled spirit. Vivienne spoke of the subtle, insidious ways Maria and Alan eroded trust, how their public pronouncements rarely matched their private actions. I dedicated my subsequent career to promoting genuine artistic integrity, in part, to atone for that early mistake, to advocate for voices that speak truth, not perform it. Their entire existence has been a carefully constructed illusion, sustained by a desperate need for external validation. It's a tragic, pathetic performance that has long outstayed its welcome. Her testimony, tinged with personal regret and professional authority, cemented the portrait of lifelong, pervasive manipulation. Julian returned to his office, the quiet hum of his laptop a welcome reprieve from the echoes of deceit he had collected. The disparate threads, woven from discarded journals, meticulous records, and the poignant, often painful memories of those exploited, now formed a coherent, undeniable tapestry. Maria and Alan Covern weren't just struggling artists. They were calculated manipulators, leveraging every interaction, every relationship, every perceived weakness, including their own son's quiet nature, into a resource for their never-ending performance. Their illness and destitution were simply their latest, most brazen acts. The objective evidence, cold and irrefutable, painted a far more brutal, yet mundane, picture than any dramatic expose could convey. He began compiling the final report, a thick binder of corroborated facts, financial records, and damning testimonies. It was a calculus of truth, designed to dismantle a calculus of lies. Eric Covern had asked for facts, and Julian had found them, a mountain of them. The sheer volume of evidence, decades in the making, would be overwhelming. He knew Eric would be ready for it. The truth, in its unvarnished, methodical form, was about to be unleashed. The soft hum of the air conditioner in Eric's home office, a sound usually synonymous with order, now felt like a buzzing tension. 3 days. 3 days since Julian Thorne had called, his voice clipped and efficient, confirming he had completed his deep dive into the Covern's past. Eric had barely slept, the silence of the suburban sanctuary amplified, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall a relentless march towards a truth he desperately craved and equally feared. He sat at his polished mahogany desk, hands clasped, a faint tremor running through them that he tried and failed to suppress. A discreet knock on the front door, precisely at 9 a.m. Julian Thorne was, predictably, punctual. Eric opened it to find the private investigator, a lean figure in an understated charcoal suit, a sturdy leather briefcase clutched in one hand, a manila envelope in the other. His steel-gray eyes, usually observant, held a new, almost weary depth today. "Mr. Covern," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of preamble. "Everything you asked for and more." Eric led him to the office, the very room where he'd painstakingly constructed his life of logic, where numbers had been his shield. Julian placed the briefcase and envelope on the pristine surface of the desk. The briefcase, Eric noted, was unusually thick, bulging with what he knew must be proof. "I've compiled a comprehensive report," Julian began, unlatching the briefcase. "Digital files, physical documents, witness testimonies, financial records, a timeline of their operations, if you will." He pulled out a thick, ring-bound binder, its cover simple, stark. "Covern, Maria and Alan Investigation Summary." Julian clicked open his tablet, projecting a meticulously organized file structure onto the large monitor Eric used for market analysis. "We started with the frayed canvas studio. As suspected, a front. Monitored their activities for a week. Observed Alan's coughing fits whenever a potential donor entered. Maria's dramatic monologues about the cold indifference of a material world. We found their hidden stash of cash, their coded ledger. Inflated expenses, misappropriated donations, funds siphoned to a personal, offshore account." Eric's breath hitched. Offshore, he had expected manipulation, not outright fraud. Julian continued, unmoved, clicking through satellite images. "And their supposed destitution. They own a small, well-maintained cottage in upstate New York, rented out under a pseudonym. Steady income for the last decade." Eric stared at the image of the quaint, ivy-covered cottage, a stark contrast to the faded, shivering studio his parents inhabited for the cameras. It wasn't just a lie, it was a carefully constructed diorama of a lie. Moving back in time, Julian said, a new file appearing. The Shifting Sands Commune, your earliest memory, I believe. Eric nodded, a knot tightening in his stomach. The distant, fragmented memories of mud, cold, and constant demands. We found Margaret Sinclair, Julian said, pausing for a moment, his gaze uncharacteristically soft. She was instrumental, provided detailed accounts of financial exploitation, how communal funds for sustainable living were redirected to fund Maria and Alan's lavish but short-lived artistic projects. She remembered you, Eric. A quiet, watchful boy, she confirmed your neglect. Said Maria frequently complained about the burden of having to perform the role of mother. The words hit Eric with the force of a physical blow. The burden of having to perform the role of mother. A role. His entire childhood, a supporting character in their grand, self-serving drama. The cold, logical calculation behind his own existence. Julian clicked to another file. The Echoing Conservatory. Lena Petrova, the art restorer. She was part of their collective briefly. Her testimony is clinical, precise. She documented Maria's method of subtly altering other artists' work, then presenting it as a collaborative, spontaneous creation for exhibition, diverting any proceeds. She described how they'd perform emotional breakdowns, real or imagined, to manipulate the collective into providing free labor, materials, and even childcare. She recalled you, Eric, often left alone, sketching geometric patterns on scraps of paper, trying to find order amidst their chaos. Lena's description painted a vivid picture of the very defense mechanism Eric had honed his entire life. He had sought logic, numbers, control, because his world had been built on artifice, chaos, and a complete lack of control over his own narrative. Next, Ilara Varma, the sculptor. She vividly recounted a piece of her own, a raw, honest sculpture that Maria subtly disfigured and then presented as a collaborative piece, claiming shared vision to secure a grant. When Ilara confronted them, they gaslit her, called her unartistic, selfish. She eventually left, disillusioned, dedicating her life to genuine, unadorned art. The layers of deceit were becoming overwhelming. It wasn't just Maria and Alan. It was everyone they touched. Julian then presented testimony from Isabel Morrow, the avant-garde theater director, and Vivienne Laurent, the veteran art critic. Both had once been drawn to the Covern's perceived radicalism, only to witness their performative cruelty, their exploitation of genuine artistic spaces like the Lumina Cultural Foundation, and their consistent charlatanism. Vivienne, in particular, expressed deep regret for her early championing of them, viewing Eric's case as a form of atonement. In short, Mr. Covern, Julian concluded, closing the binder with a soft thud, your parents are not sick. They are not destitute. They are career manipulators exploiting any avenue, any person for financial gain and public attention. They've done this for decades. Your recent success merely provided them with a new, more lucrative target. Every illness, every struggle, every artistic plight is a meticulously calculated performance. Eric sat there, absorbing it all. The clinical precision of Julian's report had stripped away every last shred of doubt, every lingering shred of filial guilt. He had always known their manipulative nature, but he had dismissed it as a chaotic, artistic eccentricity. Now he saw the chilling, calculated logic behind it. His parents were not artists. They were engineers of deception, and he, Eric, had been one of their most significant, long-running projects. A cold, hard clarity settled over him, replacing the burning shame and confusion. He felt, hollowed out but also strangely light. The weight of what if lifted, replaced by the certainty of what is. Julian rose. My invoice will be sent digitally. My work here is done. He offered a slight nod, a gesture Eric recognized as something akin to professional respect. You sought truth, Mr. Covern, and you found it. With that, Julian Thorne, the quiet dispenser of undeniable facts, exited Eric's office, leaving him alone amidst the binders and the brutal, liberating truth. Hours passed. The afternoon sun filtered through the shears cast long shadows across the room. Eric didn't move. He reread sections, cross-referenced dates, analyzed the financial spreadsheets. The meticulousness of his parents' lies was breathtaking, almost admirable in its consistent, decades-long execution. They hadn't stumbled into manipulation, they had perfected it. He heard the garage door open, Cassandra's car. Soon her footsteps, light and familiar, approached his office. He felt a pang of something he hadn't fully allowed himself to feel in weeks: vulnerability. He needed to tell her everything. Not just the facts, but the gut-wrenching realization of his own childhood, how it felt to be the silent witness, the unwitting prop. Cassandra paused at the doorway, her smile faltering as she took in the scene. The thick binders, the glowing monitor filled with damning data, and Eric, pale and rigid, surrounded by it all. Eric, her voice was soft, laced with concern. He looked up, meeting her gaze. He saw the guilt she carried, the regret for having opened the door to Maria. "Come in, Cass." His voice was raspy. I have a lot to tell you." She sat in the visitor's chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Eric took a deep breath, picking up the main binder. He didn't start with the frayed canvas studio. He started further back, with the shifting sands commune, with Margaret Sinclair's words. The burden of having to perform the role of mother. He spoke of the echoing conservatory, of Lena's and Alara's experiences, and how he had watched, a child understanding more than he could articulate, the subtle shifts, the manufactured emotions, the way other people were used as fuel for his parents' artistic fire. He told her how his love for mathematics, for clear, definable answers, was born from a childhood where nothing was real, where every interaction was a script. He confessed his quiet shame, the feeling of being inherently flawed, unlovable, because even his own parents' affection felt conditional, performative. He spoke of the fear of repeating their mistakes with Colby, the moment of clarity that had driven him to Julian. Cassandra listened, her eyes widening then tearing up. She reached out, grasping his hand. "Oh, Eric," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry, for all of it, for not seeing, for not understanding, for bringing her back into our lives." "It's not your fault, Cass," he said, squeezing her hand, a genuine warmth spreading through him. "She's a master. She manipulated you because you're a good, empathetic person. That's what they do." He showed her the financial records, the property details, the testimonies, the full, cold, calculated truth. Cassandra absorbed it all, her face shifting from shock to a simmering anger. They've been doing this for decades, all of it. The suffering artist act, the illnesses, the poverty. It was all a lie. "A calculus of lies," Eric murmured, the phrase forming on his tongue, solid and resonant. Every interaction, every appeal, precisely measured for maximum emotional yield and financial gain. And I built my life, trying to outrun that calculation, to build a fortress of fact against their fiction. He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the subtle filters of his past trauma coloring his vision. "I don't want to live like that anymore, Cass, in fear, in hiding. I don't want Colby to ever feel that kind of manipulation, to doubt his own reality. I want to fight back. Not with drama, not with performances, but with facts. My facts." Cassandra's hand tightened on his. "Then we fight back with our facts." Her eyes, usually so gentle, now held a fierce determination. "What do you want to do?" Eric took another deep breath, the clarity in his mind almost startling. "I want to write a book. A memoir, about my childhood, about their methods. Everything Julian uncovered, everything I've lived. The objective truth laid bare. I want to publish it. And then I want to go on national television and tell the world what they are." Cassandra nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Good," she said, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's time." The following week, Eric found himself in a quietly elegant brownstone in a prestigious publishing district, the headquarters of the Lexicon Literary Agency. The old building exuded a quiet gravitas, a reverence for the written word. He was ushered into a waiting area, where framed first editions of celebrated nonfiction lined the walls. Clara Sterling's office was equally refined. High ceilings, a massive mahogany desk, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowing with literary nonfiction. Clara herself was poised and astute, her dark brown hair pulled back severely, her hazel eyes missing nothing. She offered a firm handshake, a faint, thoughtful furrow appearing between her brows. "Mr. Covern," she began, her voice calm, clear, "thank you for coming. I confess I'm intrigued by your proposal but also cautious. Family memoirs, particularly those involving public figures, can be fraught with sensationalism." Eric hadn't expected anything less. He had anticipated her skepticism, her discerning eye for truth over theatrics. He laid Julian Thorne's summary on her desk. "Ms. Sterling, I understand your concern. I have no interest in sensationalism. My goal is to present an unvarnished truth, rooted in verifiable facts and documented evidence. My parents, Maria and Alan Covern, have spent their lives constructing a narrative of suffering artists, leveraging emotional appeals and fabricated crises for personal gain. This escalated into a public smear campaign against me, which led to my professional suspension." He paused, letting that sink in. "I hired a private investigator, Julian Thorne. His report, a summary of which you have, meticulously dismantles their narrative. It documents decades of calculated manipulation, financial impropriety, and emotional exploitation, not just of me, but of numerous individuals who were drawn into their various art collectives and communes." Clara picked up the summary, her eyes scanning the bullet points, the dates, the names of former associates. "And you believe a memoir, a personal account, is the appropriate vehicle for this?" "I believe it is the only vehicle," Eric stated, his voice steady. "Their weapon is performance, emotional theatrics. My weapon must be a calm, methodical, factual deconstruction of that performance. It is a story of how a life built on numbers and logic was forced to confront a lifetime of calculated lies. It's a story about the profound difference between genuine art and manipulative artifice. It's a calculus of lies." He leaned forward slightly. "And it's also about protecting my son, Colby. He has a genuine artistic spirit, and I want to ensure he understands that true creativity comes from an honest, authentic place, not from manipulation. I want to break a generational pattern." Clara looked up from the summary, her gaze piercing. She saw not just a man seeking vindication, but one driven by a deeper, ethical imperative. She had seen countless manuscripts born from anger, but Eric's tone, his meticulous presentation, was different. It was precise. It was calculated. "A calculus of lies," she repeated, tasting the words. "That's a powerful title, and your approach, Mr. Covern, it's unique. Instead of adding more drama to the noise, you're proposing to dissect it methodically with facts. That's compelling." She closed the summary folder, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "I'm interested, Mr. Covern, very interested. This won't be easy. It will require immense dedication, absolute honesty, and a willingness to revisit painful memories with clinical precision. And it will need to be legally unassailable. But if you are truly committed to telling this unvarnished truth, then I believe we have a story that needs to be told." Eric felt a surge of relief, followed by a new, quiet determination. He knew the road ahead would be arduous, fraught with emotional challenges he had long suppressed. But for the first time, he wasn't just reacting. He was acting. He was building. And this time, he was building with truth. He had a story to write, a narrative to reclaim, not just for himself, but for his son, and for anyone else who had ever been caught in the deceptive shadows of performance. He would begin by retreating, finding a quiet place where the only sounds would be the tap of keys, the rustle of paper, and the honest, unmanipulated scratch of his son's pencil. The scent of pine needles and damp earth was the first thing Eric registered, a clean, unadulterated smell that purged the lingering staleness of city air from his lungs. The hearthstone retreat, A small cabin nestled deep within a thick stand of pines stood before him, a fortress of quiet against the chaos he'd left behind. Its logs were weathered, dark with age, and a thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, already lit for his arrival. He dragged his suitcase, heavy with clothes and a far heavier laptop, up the path, the crunch of gravel a stark contrast to the distant, perpetual hum of the city he'd fled. Inside, the cabin was a symphony of natural materials, exposed wooden beams, a vast stone fireplace that dominated the living area, and wide plank floors that creaked softly under his weight. A sturdy wooden desk, cleared and waiting, stood before a large window that framed a panoramic view of the forest. This was it. No corporate high-rises, no flashing news alerts, no desperate theatrical parents. Just him, the woods, and the truth he was determined to excavate. He unpacked methodically, his movements a practiced ritual of control. Laptop placed precisely center on the desk, notebooks stacked, pens aligned. Julian Thorne's extensive report, a thick, spiral-bound tome of undeniable facts, lay open on a side table. It was the blueprint for his counteroffensive, the cold, irrefutable evidence that peeled back the layers of his parents' decades-long deception. Reading it had been a surgical process. Each corroborated lie a clean cut to the tumor of his past. But now, it was time for the messy, bloody work of writing his own story, of breathing life into the dry facts with the agony and anger of his experience. Sat at the desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, a blank document. The white void felt vast, terrifying. He built his life on logic, on the certainty of numbers, on systems that had clear inputs and predictable outputs. A memoir, by its very nature, was an exploration of the unpredictable, the messy, the subjective. He had to capture not just what happened, but how it felt. That was the calculus he hadn't mastered, the emotional truth that still eluded his precise grasp. He started with the echoing conservatory, the derelict industrial building that had been Maria and Alan's art collective headquarters, a place Julian had meticulously documented. The air always felt charged there, he typed, not with creativity but with expectation. Every conversation was a performance, every gesture choreographed for maximum effect. As he wrote, the cabin's serene quiet began to peel back the years. He could almost hear Maria's dramatic sighs, Alan's grand pronouncements. The ink on the page became a conduit, the words a dam, holding back the flood of memory, allowing him to examine it piece by piece, rather than be swept away. It was exhausting work, each sentence draining a sliver of his guarded energy, but also, paradoxically, filling him with a sense of purpose. A week into his solitude, the quiet was broken by the cheerful rumble of Cassandra's SUV, pulling up the winding gravel driveway. Colby, his backpack slung over one shoulder, scampered out, his face alight with an excitement Eric rarely saw in their suburban home. "Dad." "Hey, champ," Eric said, meeting him halfway, a genuine smile easing the tautness in his jaw. He ruffled Colby's hair, the familiar warmth a comforting anchor. Colby took in the cabin with wide, curious eyes. "Wow, it's like a giant treehouse. Is this where you're writing your story?" "It is," Eric confirmed, leading him inside. Colby explored, his fingers tracing the rough-hewn beams, his gaze lingering on the stone fireplace. Eric watched him, a thought, tentative at first, beginning to coalesce in his mind. Later that evening, after a dinner of chili cooked over the open fire, the idea surfaced. Eric watched Colby sketching quietly in his notebook, absorbed in a world of fantastical creatures and vibrant landscapes. "Colby," he began carefully, "you know how I'm writing about? Well, about Grandma and Grandpa and my childhood." Colby nodded without looking up. He knew enough, having seen the talk show, the confusion, the anger that had rippled through their once stable home. "I'm writing it to tell the truth," Eric continued, "to make sure people understand what really happened." He paused, gathering courage. "And I was thinking, your drawings, they're really powerful. They capture feelings, even things that are hard to put into words." Colby finally looked up, his brow furrowed, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Are you? Are you going to say they're good enough for a book? Eric felt a pang. Colby's defensiveness, a subtle echo of his own parents' craving for external validation, was something he was determined to dismantle. They're not just good enough, Colby. They're exactly what I need. My book is about truth and your art. It's honest. It's authentic. Would you? Would you be willing to illustrate parts of my memoir? Colby beamed a genuine, unburdened smile. Really? My drawings? His voice was a whisper disbelieving. Really? Eric affirmed, a profound sense of rightness settling over him. He watched his son, the purest, untainted artist he knew, consider the proposal. This wasn't just a collaboration. It was a bridge, a way to mend what he'd inadvertently broken between them, a quiet atonement for his own unconscious repression of Colby's artistic spirit. Colby spent the next morning setting up his own workspace at the small kitchen table, surrounded by his pencils, watercolors, and sketchbooks. Eric, at his desk by the window, worked on a chapter detailing his parents' early art collective days, a period Julian's report had illuminated with stark precision. He heard the soft scratch of Colby's pencils, the rustle of paper, and felt a quiet, unfamiliar contentment. "Dad," Colby called out, holding up a drawing. It was an abstract depiction of the echoing conservatory, rendered in charcoal and muted blues. The lines were jagged, the shapes distorted, almost like fragmented screams. There was a small, shadowy figure in the corner, head bowed. "This is how it feels reading your notes about it. All broken." Eric walked over, leaning over his son's shoulder. His first instinct, the engineer in him, was to correct. "It's a bit imprecise, isn't it, son? Maybe a clearer depiction of the structure, or the people." He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the urge to impose order. It was his parents' voice, subtle but insidious, whispering in his own ear. Colby's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "But this is how I see it, Dad, like the feeling of it, not just what it looked like." He pointed to a smear of dark charcoal. "That's the darkness. And this," he traced a faint, almost invisible white line, "is the little bit of light that was trying to get out." Eric looked at the drawing, truly looked at it this time. The jagged lines, the fragmented screams, the sliver of struggling light. He saw the truth in it, a truth his own linear mind might have missed. A wave of shame washed over him, a cold splash of recognition. He had been doing it again, hadn't he? Subtly pushing Colby toward his own narrow definition of good, trying to control his unique vision, just as Maria and Alan had always done, albeit with more theatrical flair. He knelt, bringing himself to Colby's eye level. "You're absolutely right, Colby," Eric said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "It's perfect. The feeling is what matters here. You captured it, the brokenness, the light trying to get out." He touched the faint white line. "That's important." Colby beamed, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Really?" "Really," Eric affirmed. In that moment, something shifted within him. He was not just writing a memoir. He was dismantling a lifetime of ingrained patterns, both his parents' and his own. He was learning to trust emotion, to value authenticity over mere precision, to embrace the messy, subjective truth that lived beyond the numbers. His phone buzzed. It was Clara Sterling, his literary agent, a steady, discerning voice from the literary world. Her calls were always a blend of astute editorial insights and quiet encouragement. "Eric, darling, another excellent batch of chapters," Clara's voice purred over the speakerphone, a pleasant contrast to the rustic setting. "The section on your parents' early collective at the Shifting Sands commune is particularly chilling. Julian's evidence about their financial impropriety and the exploitation of Margaret Sinclair adds such a concrete, undeniable layer to the narrative. It's not just a story of emotional abuse. It's a story of calculated material harm." Eric gripped the phone, gazing out at the swaying pines. "I'm glad it's coming through. It felt difficult to write. Bringing those figures to life on the page, the people who were drawn in used." "Precisely," Clara interrupted gently. "And that's where we need to dig deeper. You describe what happened, the logistical manipulation, with such precision. but the reader needs to feel the impact. When Maria would praise someone's authentic spirit, only to later dismiss their bourgeois attachments when they didn't comply, how did that feel to witness as a child? The betrayal, the erosion of trust. Don't shy away from the visceral, Eric. The facts are your armor, but your vulnerability is the sword. Eric paused. Clara was right. He had been meticulously documenting, recounting, but often from a slight emotional distance, the corporate executive observing a case study. He'd focused on the calculus, the cold, logical progression of their lies. Now he understood he needed to write the lies from the perspective of the child who experienced them. "I understand," he said, a new resolve hardening his voice. "I'll go back. I'll add the silences, the apprehension, the way it felt to be a prop." Clara gave a satisfied hum. "That's my author. Remember, Eric, the truth isn't just about what happened. It's about why it mattered, and how it made you you." Days melted into weeks, a rhythm of writing, sketching, and quiet collaboration. Colby's drawings began to fill the cabin, a child's fearful eyes peering from behind a velvet curtain, a chaotic tangle of abstract shapes representing his parents' performances, a delicate small flower blooming defiantly in a field of thorns. Eric, observing Colby, saw the emotional landscape of his own childhood translated through his son's unburdened hand, and it unlocked new depths in his own writing. Then came the calls from Evelyn Hayes, his barrister, her voice crisp, devoid of sentiment, cutting through the forest quiet like a finely honed blade. "Eric, the latest draft. Strong, very strong. Julian's corroboration from Lena Petrova regarding the Verita studio and Alara Varma's experiences at the unadorned atelier is invaluable. Their testimonies on Maria and Alan's artistic exploitation are watertight. However, on page 147, where you describe Maria's public accusation that you stole her artistic vision for a corporate presentation." Eric braced himself. "Yes. We need to nuance that. While Julian's findings unequivocally show she had no legitimate claim, and her vision was often a derivative appropriation of others, we cannot simply state she lied. We must say, Maria publicly asserted I had stolen her artistic vision, a claim later disproven by documented evidence of prior art and independent testimony from former collaborators. It's a subtle shift, but it protects us from a direct defamation counterclaim. The facts will speak, Eric, but they must do so in legally defensible language." Evelyn was his bulwark, the unyielding fortress around his truth. Her cold, analytical eye ensured that every word, every accusation, however justified, was meticulously fortified against legal assault. She pointed out potential ambiguities, suggested rephrasing statements of personal experience to be observations, and cross-referenced every claim with Julian's extensive dossier of evidence from the Civic Vault of Records and Lumina Cultural Foundation. "They will fight, Eric," Evelyn warned him. "They will twist, they will theatricalize, they will gaslight. Your memoir must be impervious. It must be a weapon forged not just from pain, but from unassailable fact, presented with surgical precision." Eric listened, taking notes, understanding the symbiotic relationship between Clara's push for emotional truth and Evelyn's demand for legal truth. Both were vital. His memoir was not just a story. It was a calculus, a methodical deconstruction of lies, fortified with emotion, weaponized with facts. The final weeks were a blur of intense focus. Eric refined, Colby drew, and the cabin hummed with creative energy. Colby's final illustration, destined for the book's end pages, was a vibrant, almost ethereal depiction of a boy, no longer shadowy, holding a small, brightly colored bird that sang a clear, joyful note. In the background, faded, broken lines represented the past, but they were distant, receding. The manuscript was finally complete. Eric read it one last time from cover to cover. It was raw, honest, and undeniably his. The meticulous executive had finally allowed himself to feel, to express, to embrace the truth of his messy, human experience. "It's done," he told Clara on a hushed call. "Excellent, Eric. Evelyn has given it her final blessing and the legal team is confident. The editor is absolutely thrilled. We're moving to print. There was a pause, a breath of anticipation. Are you ready? Eric looked at Colby, who was humming softly as he tidied his art supplies. He looked at the manuscript, thick and real, lying on the desk. He thought of the public humiliation, the career suspended, the initial strain on his marriage. He thought of the clarity, the reconciliation, the renewed bond with his son. "I'm ready," he said, the word a whisper that held the weight of a lifetime. The book, A Calculus of Lies, was no longer just a project. It was his truth, and soon the world would read it. The silence of the cabin now felt pregnant with the impending echo of his voice, about to reach millions. It would be a confrontation on a scale he hadn't yet imagined. The world, or at least that corner of it that trafficked in public sentiment and literary buzz, had been set ablaze by a calculus of lies. It had started subtly, a ripple in the literary community, a murmur of an insurance executive's surprisingly poignant memoir. Then, like a calculation reaching its inevitable exponential conclusion, it exploded. Critics hailed it for its unflinching honesty, its meticulous detail, and its stark contrast to the sensationalism it critiqued. Readers, exhausted by manufactured drama, devoured Eric's narrative, finding in his quiet pursuit of truth a resonant chord. The raw, almost childlike purity of Colby's illustrations, scattered throughout the text like forgotten dreams, elevated the work from mere expose to a genuine artistic statement, a testament to uncorrupted expression. Eric's carefully constructed world, once a fortress against chaos, was now open, vulnerable, and paradoxically stronger than ever. It was this authenticity that caught the attention of Amelia Vance. Her piercing blue eyes, accustomed to dissecting political machinations and corporate malfeasance, saw beyond the family drama to the profound psychological undercurrents of Eric's story. She saw a man who, unlike so many public figures, wasn't performing. He was simply revealing. Her show, the highly respected Vance and Veracity, prided itself on unvarnished truth, and Eric Covern was a story ripe for the telling. She'd contacted Clara Sterling directly, bypassing publicists, a clear sign of her intense personal interest. Clara, ever the discerning agent, knew this was the moment. She ensured the groundwork was laid meticulously, presenting Eric as a man of facts, not feelings, which was exactly how Amelia preferred her subjects. "The key, Eric, is to remain unwavering," Clara had reiterated, her hazel eyes fixed on him across the polished table in her Lexicon Literary Agency office. "Amelia respects the data. She respects the logic. Your strength is your meticulous truth." Evelyn Hayes, Eric's barrister, nodded from her adjacent armchair, her posture as precise as her legal arguments. "Every statement has been vetted. Every piece of evidence Julian gathered is in your dossier, and we have copies with the network. If they attempt to discredit, we have the unassailable facts. Their legal team is aware of the implications of any further defamatory action." Her clear gray eyes held a hint of satisfaction. Evelyn didn't often allow emotion to color her professional demeanor, but the elegance of this strategic counteroffensive was clearly appealing to her analytical mind. This was a battle of information, and Eric was armed to the teeth. Eric felt a quiet hum of resolve, a stark contrast to the debilitating anxiety that had once defined his encounters with his parents. He was no longer a boy shrinking from their theatrics. He was a man standing in his truth, armed with a calculus of his own. He thought of Colby back at the Hearthstone retreat, already sketching ideas for his next unprompted illustration, a dragon, not a lie, soaring freely. The memory anchored him. The Apex broadcast studio was a cathedral of controlled light and sound, a technological marvel designed to project reality, or at least a highly polished version of it. Eric stepped out of the green room, Clara on one side, Evelyn on the other, the air conditioning a cool ghost against his skin. The floor was polished chrome, the walls sleek glass and steel. Robotic cameras, silent and menacing, glided along their tracks. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, their headsets a constant, low murmur of commands. The set itself was minimalist, a sleek dark desk for Amelia and two inviting, yet strategically positioned, armchairs for her guests, bathed in precise, multi-layered lighting that erased shadows and enhanced every contour. As he walked onto the set, the heat of the lights immediately enveloped him. Amelia Vance sat poised at her desk, a picture of calm authority. Her dark auburn hair was perfectly coiffed, her piercing blue eyes radiating an intelligent curiosity that was both disarming and intensely probing. She offered a small, professional smile. "Mr. Covern, thank you for joining us," she began, her voice a warm, articulate instrument that filled the studio. "Thank you for having me, Ms. Vance." Eric's voice was steady, even. He felt a quiet confidence, born not of bravado, but of preparation and an absolute certainty in his story. The interview began with the memoir. Amelia expertly navigated Eric through the early chapters, exploring his childhood in the echoing conservatory and the shifting sands commune. Eric recounted his experiences not with anger, but with a detached, almost academic precision. He spoke of the artistic collective, the performative parenting, the gaslighting, and the constant feeling of being a prop in his parents' grand, self-serving narratives. "And your decision to cut ties at such a young age was fueled by this sense of being a character in their play rather than a son?" Amelia asked, her gaze unwavering. "Precisely," Eric responded, leaning slightly forward, his hands resting calmly on his knees. "Their reality was negotiable. Their art was a weapon. I needed a life built on constants, on unassailable facts. I chose logic as my sanctuary." He looked directly into the camera, a quiet strength emanating from him. "And for 16 years it worked, until it didn't." Amelia transitioned to the recent public smear campaign, showing clips from Morning Reckoning, the garish, theatrical performance by Maria and Alan. The juxtaposition was stark. On one screen, Maria's painted face, contorted in exaggerated grief, Alan's feigned coughs and dramatic pronouncements. On the other, Eric, calm and composed, a stark antidote to their histrionics. Your memoir details how your private investigator, Julian Thorne, methodically dismantled their narrative of destitution and illness, Amelia prompted. Can you elaborate on the discrepancy? Eric nodded. Julian's work was thorough. We found discrepancies in their grant applications stretching back decades, showing inflated expenses and misappropriated funds. He spoke to former associates like Lena Petrova, an art restorer, and Alara Varma, a sculptor, who personally experienced their exploitation and witnessed their manipulative art firsthand. Their testimonies, corroborated by official records from the Civic Vault of Records and even some cultural foundations, revealed a consistent pattern. There was never genuine destitution, just an elaborate, lifelong performance to leverage sympathy and resources. As Eric spoke, images flashed on the LED screens behind them. Grainy photos of the dilapidated echoing conservatory, excerpts from Julian's report highlighting financial inconsistencies, and even a still image of Maria in surprisingly opulent attire from a social media post, taken just days before her destitute talk show appearance. The network had done their homework. Then the earpiece in Amelia's ear buzzed. Her expression remained neutral, but a subtle tension entered her shoulders. "We have breaking news," she announced, turning slightly to face the main camera. "It appears Maria and Alan Covern are outside the studio, attempting to gain entry, claiming they have vital information that proves Mr. Covern is lying." A collective gasp went through the crew, though Eric merely tightened his grip on his knees. He had anticipated this. Evelyn had predicted it with chilling accuracy. Clara had prepared him. "Our security is currently managing the situation," Amelia continued, her voice perfectly modulated. "However, they have sent us a pre-recorded statement, which they claim is their truth." A clip then began to play on the large screen, Maria and Alan, this time against a backdrop of what looked like a hastily arranged protest sign that read, "Truth is a performance." Maria, tears streaming down her face, wailed, "He wants to silence us. Our creative souls, our truth. Eric, our son, he just wants to control the narrative like he always has. He abandoned us for his numbers, for his soulless corporate life. Alan, looking frail, clutched a painting of what looked like a discarded, broken heart. He fears art. He fears the truth of emotion. It was a performance of raw, unadulterated melodrama, and for a fleeting moment, Eric felt a familiar pang of shame, the old hooks trying to find purchase. But then, he remembered Colby's drawings, the simple truth of the Hearthstone retreat, and the cold, hard facts Julian had laid out. Amelia let the clip play for a full minute, her face unreadable. When it faded, she turned back to Eric. "Mr. Covern, your parents claim you're trying to control the narrative, to silence their artistic truth. What is your response to this latest, highly theatrical, public statement?" Eric took a slow, deep breath, letting the manufactured drama dissipate. "My response, Ms. Vance, is in my book. It's in the hundreds of pages of documented evidence, in the testimony of independent witnesses, and in the artwork of my son, Colby, which graces its pages." He paused, his gaze calm and direct. "They call their actions performance and art. I call it manipulation and exploitation. The difference lies in the outcome. One seeks to connect through vulnerability, the other seeks to control through deceit. My memoir is not about silencing them. It's about reclaiming my own voice and exposing the brutal, mundane reality that fueled their lifelong charade." He then calmly laid out two more key pieces of information, evidence Julian had painstakingly gathered. An excerpt from an old, anonymous internal report from the Lumina Cultural Foundation detailing questionable financial practices during Maria and Alan's tenure, and a quote from Vivienne Laurent, the esteemed art critic, who, with regret, acknowledged her own early misjudgment in championing them. He spoke of Isabel Marau's insights into performative cruelty versus genuine expression. Each point was delivered with the precision of a surgeon. The studio was utterly silent save for Eric's clear voice. Amelia watched him, a flicker of professional satisfaction in her eyes. This wasn't just a story, it was a definitive expose. His calm, factual dismantling of their latest dramatic act was more powerful than any shouting match. The public, who had seen Maria and Alan's previous performance, now had the other side, meticulously presented, undeniable. The contrast was devastating. Maria and Alan, in their desperation for attention, had merely provided Eric with another opportunity to showcase their performative nature, further cementing their own public humiliation. The stage they had sought to hijack became, instead, the ultimate tableau for their undoing. As the interview neared its close, Amelia thanked Eric for his courage. "Mr. Covern, what do you hope readers take away from A Calculus of Lies?" Eric smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that finally reached his eyes. "That truth, even when uncomfortable, is the most powerful foundation for life, and that authenticity in art and in living is the only true creation." Back in the green room, the immediate aftermath was a blur of relieved exhalations. Clara hugged him tightly. "You were magnificent, Eric, utterly magnificent." Evelyn, though more reserved, offered a firm handshake. "Unassailable, just as planned." He saw the faint, almost imperceptible smiles from the crew, a quiet acknowledgement of the performance that wasn't a performance at all. Stepping out of the studio and into the cool night air, the city lights sparkled, no longer a daunting cityscape of expectation but a constellation of possibilities. The heavy weight of his past, finally unburdened by secrets, felt lighter than he could ever remember. His phone buzzed with a message from Cassandra. "You were incredible. Colby says he's already sketching ideas for a sequel. Come home." He knew as he climbed into the car that his reputation wasn't just restored. It was rebuilt, on a foundation stronger than numbers, more resilient than any facade. He was no longer just an executive, but a truth-teller, a father who championed authenticity, and a man who had finally found his own unvarnished voice. The greatest act of creation, he realized, was simply revealing what already was. The journey ahead felt less like a battle and more like a quiet unfolding. The silence that followed the primetime interview was unlike any Eric had ever experienced. It wasn't the suffocating hush of professional judgment, nor the brittle quiet of a strained marriage. This was a silence that hummed with a profound sense of release, like the reverberation after a perfectly struck chord. He awoke the next morning in the soft light of his suburban sanctuary, Cassandra's even breath a comforting rhythm beside him, and felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. For 16 years, he had carried the weight of a narrative that wasn't his, built by others, perpetuated by others. Now, the burden had lifted. His phone, when he finally dared to check it, was alight, not with condemnation but with an outpouring of support. Emails from former colleagues, friends he hadn't spoken to in years, even strangers. Courageous, one subject line read. Thank you for speaking your truth, another. His inbox was a testament to the fact that integrity, when presented with unassailable facts, resonated deeper than any staged performance. Several messages were from headhunters, hinting at opportunities beyond the insurance world, roles that valued more than just a pristine record. They spoke of leadership, resilience, and, pointedly, authenticity. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes, a feeling he realized he hadn't truly known in decades. The meticulously restored reputation felt less like a carefully polished facade and more like solid ground beneath his feet. Cassandra stirred, her hand finding his. "You slept," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep but laced with relief. "Really slept." He squeezed her hand, the deepest in years. He watched the morning sun trace patterns on their pristine white duvet, suddenly aware of the comfort and peace he had almost lost. The room, once a symbol of his desperate need for order, now simply felt like home, a haven. "Thank you," he said, the words quiet but potent, "for everything." Her gaze met his, clear and unwavering. "We did it together. And for Colby." She sat up, pulling the duvet with her, a subtle vulnerability in her movements. "I'm proud of you, Eric." The simple affirmation meant more than all the glowing emails combined. Their marriage, battered by the storm, had not just weathered it but had emerged stronger, built on a new, deeper bedrock of open communication and shared understanding. There were no more unspoken anxieties, no more carefully guarded parts of his past. The truth, ugly as it had been, had purified their bond. Later that morning, Eric found Colby hunched over his desk in his room, vibrant colors spilling from a tin box, a half-finished drawing of a fantastical bird with iridescent wings taking shape. The intense concentration on his son's face, the slight furrow of his brow, was a mirror of his own when immersed in complex actuarial tables, but with a vibrancy that Eric had suppressed in himself, and inadvertently in Colby. A pang of regret, quickly replaced by warmth, went through him. "What's this magnificent creature?" Eric asked, leaning over his son's shoulder. He used to hover, offering suggestions that subtly redirected Colby's natural impulses. Now he simply observed, genuinely curious. Colby looked up, his eyes bright. "It's a phoenix," he explained, pointing with a paint-stained finger. "It rises from the ashes even when things are really bad, and its feathers are made of all the colors of true feelings." Eric felt a lump form in his throat. Colby's drawings, once a source of quiet anxiety for Eric, too much like them, too chaotic, too artistic, now represented pure, unadulterated truth. He remembered his own childhood, the small, secret wooden bird he'd carved, hidden away, his only innocent foray into art. He remembered Cassandra finding it, keeping it safe. He was so caught up in the numbers, in creating a life that was the antithesis of his parents', that he had almost extinguished that light in his own son. Not anymore. "It's incredible, son," Eric said, his voice thick. He sat on the edge of Colby's bed, looking around the room which, since their time at the Hearthstone retreat, had become a dedicated atelier. New easels, high-quality paper, a rainbow of paints and pastels that Eric had ordered online after that crucial moment of self-awareness. He wasn't just buying supplies. He was buying freedom, validating a part of his son he had almost inadvertently stifled. "Are you going to draw more for the book?" Colby asked, his voice hopeful. The memoir, A Calculus of Lies, had been a revelation for him too, a way to understand the complex, confusing world of his grandparents. He was proud of his contributions. More than ever, Eric confirmed. Your art tells the story in a way my words alone never could. It shows the feelings, the truth that goes beyond numbers. Colby beamed, instantly returning to his phoenix. Eric watched him, feeling a deep, abiding joy. This was what true creation felt like, not performance, not manipulation, but the honest expression of inner worlds. A few days later, an email landed in Eric's inbox from Silas Chen, curator of the Unvarnished Gallery. Eric remembered Julian mentioning him briefly, a man known for championing authentic art. The subject line read, "A Calculus of Lies and the Art of Truth." Eric felt a tremor of anticipation. Silas's email was eloquent, philosophical, and deeply appreciative of the memoir. He spoke of its courage, its unflinching honesty, and its unique blend of logic and raw human experience. Then came the invitation. We at the Unvarnished Gallery believe your son Colby's illustrations are not merely accompaniments to your narrative, Mr. Covern, but truth-telling works of art in their own right. They are the untainted reflections of a child's perception, a pure counterpoint to artifice. We would be honored to host an exhibition of Colby's original artwork from the memoir, alongside a discussion with yourself and Colby on the profound intersection of truth, memory, and artistic expression. It would be a celebration of authenticity. Eric reread the email twice, a lump in his throat. An exhibition, for Colby, at a real gallery. It was an affirmation not just of his book but of his son's spirit, of everything they had fought for. He forwarded the email to Cassandra, then walked to Colby's room, taking a deep breath. "Colby," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "how would you feel about your phoenix and all your other creatures being in an art gallery?" Colby's eyes widened, the paintbrush falling from his hand. "Really? A real gallery?" "A very real gallery," Eric confirmed, a proud grin spreading across his face. "One that values truth above all else." The day they visited the Unvarnished Gallery for the initial meeting with Silas Chen was a revelation. The gallery was nestled in a revitalized arts district, a stunning contemporary minimalist building of clean lines, exposed concrete, natural wood, and expansive glass. It felt quietly profound, a sanctuary where the art spoke for itself, unburdened by theatrical pretense. Silas Chen, with his distinguished silver streaks and deep gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, moved with a subtle artistic grace, a thoughtful, quiet smile on his face. He extended a hand to Eric, then bent low to meet Colby's gaze. "Young artist," he said, his voice soft but resonant, "it is an honor to meet you. Your work speaks volumes." Colby, usually shy, seemed to blossom under Silas's genuine attention. As they walked through the sun-drenched halls, Eric felt a profound sense of rightness. This was the antithesis of the echoing conservatory, of the frayed canvas studio. This was where art truly lived, where it healed, where it spoke truth. "Your memoir, Mr. Covern," Silas mused, as they settled into a quiet alcove with cups of artisanal tea, "is a testament to the power of unvarnished truth. It dismantles the very notion that life or art is merely a performance to be curated for effect. And Colby's illustrations, they are the heartbeat of that truth. They are pure, untainted, directly from the soul. They show us that the greatest act of creation is often the simplest, to simply be authentic." Eric nodded, absorbing Silas's words. He had been so focused on proving his parents' lies that he hadn't fully articulated this deeper truth for himself. Art wasn't a weapon of manipulation. It was a conduit for genuine expression, for connection. And in seeing Colby's art through Silas's discerning eyes, he saw his own path more clearly. He no longer needed to build fortresses of logic against chaos. He could build bridges of authenticity. In the weeks leading up to the exhibition, their suburban sanctuary hummed with a renewed creative energy. Eric and Colby spent hours together, carefully selecting the illustrations, Eric asking probing, open-ended questions about the feelings and stories behind each one. Colby, with his father's unwavering support, described the quiet terror of seeing his grandparents' dramatic outbursts, the confusion of their performances, and the quiet solace he found in his sketchbook. Eric, in turn, opened up about his own childhood, sharing details he had suppressed for decades, the words flowing freely as he looked at Colby's vivid depictions of their shared, painful past. Cassandra watched them, her heart swelling with gratitude. The quiet tension that had once permeated their home was gone, replaced by laughter, by shared projects, by open, honest dialogue. Eric no longer retreated into his office, guarding himself. He was present, engaged, truly seeing his son. Their evening conversations were no longer careful navigation around an emotional minefield, but explorations of their shared future, built on the solid ground of trust and truth. She felt a peace she hadn't thought possible, a sense of belonging in a truly authentic family. The exhibition opening at the Unvarnished Gallery was a quiet triumph. The gallery was filled with a diverse crowd: art critics, curious readers of the memoir, fellow artists, and many people who had simply been moved by Eric's story. Colby's illustrations, vibrant and poignant, adorned the walls, each one a window into the child's perspective of a chaotic, manipulative upbringing, now juxtaposed with Eric's clear, factual narrative panels. The phoenix, now complete, soared majestically from a large canvas, its multicolored feathers shimmering under the gallery's subtle lighting. Eric stood by Colby, his hand resting proudly on his son's shoulder, a stark contrast to the stiff, guarded man he once was. He spoke briefly, his voice calm and clear, without notes or pretense. "My life was built on numbers," he began, looking out at the attentive faces. "A calculus of logic, a fortress against the chaos of lies. But I learned that sometimes the most profound truths aren't quantifiable. They're felt. They're seen through the innocent eyes of a child and expressed through the honest strokes of a brush." He gestured to Colby's artwork. "This is not just art, this is truth, and in creating it we found our own voices and we found each other." Colby, standing a little taller than Eric had ever seen him, nodded seriously. Later, as the crowd thinned, Sela's chin clapped Eric on the back. "A profound evening, Mr. Covern. This is precisely the kind of truth art my gallery was founded to champion. It proves that authenticity has its own undeniable resonance." Eric smiled, a deep, genuine smile. "It does," he agreed. He looked at Colby, who was excitedly explaining the symbolism of his phoenix to a small cluster of admiring adults. He looked at Cassandra, standing by his side, her eyes radiating warmth and pride. He looked around the gallery at the honest, unadorned art and felt a quiet, profound certainty. His old life, defined by numbers and the calculated avoidance of chaos, was gone. In its place, he had built something far more robust, a life defined by truth, by integrity, and by the boundless, authentic creativity he now nurtured in his son and in himself. He was no longer just an insurance executive. He was a husband, a father, a storyteller, and a champion of unvarnished truth. The calculus of lies had been painstakingly solved, not with equations, but with the messy, beautiful, undeniable power of honest creation. And sometimes, he realized, looking at Colby's phoenix, the greatest act of creation was simply allowing the truth to rise.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button to like it. And please do subscribe to support the channel.